episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 459, Channeling the Battle Zone. The episode begins with, right at the end of last episode, where May and Drew were in the quarterfinals of the Kanto Grand Festival, battling it out, with Squirtle having just launched a bubble attack that filled the stadium, while Combuskin glides through the air with a sky uppercut, right through the bubbles. Since this combination of attacks was so beautiful, Drew did lose some points. However, Flygon, who Combuskin was heading for, didn't take any damage as Combuskin missed Flygon because it dodged. And Absol then used Razor Wind to hit Squirtle and Combuskin, causing an explosion of dust as Squirtle and Combuskin were sent flying to the ground, knocked down, making Pikachu, Brock, Ash, and Max panic, while Apom was just excited by the intense battle. With Combuskin and Squirtle down, Flygon used a flamethrower, leading Combuskin to counterattack with a fire spin, resulting in an explosion of fire that pushed both Combuskin and Flygon back, deducting points from both May and Drew, leading Lillian to comment on how intense the battle was, and May to comment on Drew's fast speed. Although she didn't compliment him too much, because she remembered that he was her opponent, after all. The three judges comment on how intense the battle was as well, each of them giving their own praise to either Combuskin, Squirtle, Flygon, or Absol. Drew didn't really pay attention to any of the compliments though. He instead stayed focused on launching another attack, which shocked Ash, Max, and Brock and Apom and Pikachu by how fast Drew was able to do something new, as he told Flygon and Absol to launch the Dragon Formation combo they had practiced, which meant Absol now had Flygon on its back. And Absol used a Razor Wind, and Flygon gave the Razor Wind more power by adding a Dragon Breath to it. Both Combuskin and Squirtle tried their best to dodge, but Drew's combination was so massive that even as they thought they were out of range, they weren't, and both Squirtle and Combuskin were knocked down in a huge explosion, which made the crowd go wild, impressed with Drew's power. And meanwhile, in the stands, Brock was very impressed by Drew's combination attack, noting that it must have taken an incredible amount of time to perfect it. Ash and Max called out to May, telling her not to give up, no matter what. Backstage, in the waiting room, Soledad watched, very much looking forward to seeing who would win the battle, while Harley, who was also watching, still getting over his loss in the last episode, commented to himself that Drew had finally stopped going easy on May, and he really hoped that Drew would at least beat May. As for Team Rocket, they were still reporting on the battle, with Jesse being the speaker and James Wobbuffet and Meowth still being the camera crew. Anyways, back to the actual battle. Flygon went on Absol's back again, and Flygon used a Steel Wing, and Absol used Iron Tail, with both Pokemon rushing forward with these attacks. However, while both Pokemon were getting closer to Squirtle and Combuskin, May thought up a strategy, directing Combuskin and Squirtle to launch a Fire Spin and Bubble combination, which actually manages to overpower Drew's combination, sending Flygon and Absol flying back, much to Drew's shock and Lillian's amazement, and Ash, Brock, Max, Apom, and Pikachu's joy. With Ash and Max instantly recognizing the combination that May had just used as being similar to the combination used by Tucker back at the Battle Dome, when Tucker used Arcanine and Swampert to attack Ash's Pokemon, and combined the fire and water into one attack. We see a flashback of Tucker's fire and water tornado from Arcanine and Swampert, while Brock compliments May on drawing experience from recent travels and events, saying that May had really learned a lot about battling throughout her journey, and that was a great thing. We then see May praising herself for remembering Tucker's battle strategy, and Absol and Flygon lying on the ground. From the waiting room, Soledad wondered how Drew would respond to May's attack, while Harley, who was watching at the top of the stands, was infuriated by May's attack, inferring that May thinks that Harley wasn't skilled enough to face her strongest combinations. Basically, he was mad that May had seemingly went easy on him. And Harley proceeds to say multiple violent threats towards May, basically saying he would kill her and shit like that, which alerted several of the people in the audience, alarming them. Anyways, back to the battle. The timer had arrived at just below 4 minutes remaining, while Squirtle then used a Rapid Spin as it would draw it into its shell, with Combuskin and Squirtle very determined to win. Luckily, Squirtle going into its shell prevented it from being blinded by Flash, unlike Combuskin, because Absol had just used Flash. Flygon saw that Squirtle was coming towards it, spinning fast, so it tried to use Steel Wing to divert Squirtle's path to prevent it from hitting, but Flygon only managed to knock Squirtle above the stadium. And Ash, Max, Brock, Apom, and Pikachu were amazed when Squirtle used this to its advantage as it came out of its shell when it was up in the air. Flygon had its back turned, assuming that it had dealt with Squirtle. It didn't know that it was up in the air, so Flygon was caught off guard when Squirtle used a whole bunch of bubbles towards Flygon, although Absol tried to protect Flygon by trying to divert the bubbles with a Razor Wind attack, but Combuskin stops the Razor Wind in its tracks by using a Fire Spin, which causes a huge explosion between the Razor Wind and Fire Spin, allowing the bubbles to go through it and hit Flygon, which in turn lowered Drew's points. Squirtle then dropped down to the ground and used an Ice Beam just inches away from Flygon, and that meant that since the attack was so close range, it was extremely powerful, so Flygon was knocked down to the ground, finished off, defeated, which Lillian and the judges officially declared, meaning that it was now just Absol versus Combuskin and Squirtle. However, when Squirtle took out Flygon, it still hadn't finished its descent down to the ground, so Absol took advantage of this per Drew's orders and attacked Squirtle while it was still in the air with an Iron Tail, which launched Squirtle into a stadium wall, bringing up some dust as Squirtle was knocked out from the impact, meaning that Squirtle was knocked out, which Lillian and the judges officially declared. The crowd went wild at the fact that Drew and May had both lost one Pokemon by this point, and May and Drew both recalled their unconscious Pokemon. May recalling Squirtle, and Drew recalling Flygon. And the two trainers then thanked their Pokemon for their efforts. So now, it was just May's Combuskin versus Drew's Absol, and there were 2 minutes remaining on the clock. Combuskin then used a Mega Kick, and Absol used an Iron Tail, and both of these attacks clashed, injuring both Absol and Combuskin equally. However, Absol managed to strike Combuskin with a Razor Wind, too. sending it flying back, with Drew having taken advantage of Combusken being weak after the Iron Tail attack, and as a result, more of May's points were knocked off. However, Combusken retaliated with a very strong Fire Spin, but Absol blocked the Fire Spin by using a Water Pulse and launched the Water Pulse towards Combusken, which did a lot of damage to it, since Combusken was a Fire type, and the Water Pulse was a Water type move, which Lillian commented on, along with the fact that the wave was pretty big, and there was also only a minute and 42 seconds left, and May appeared to have less points than Drew. However, the Water Pulse dissipated, and May could see that Combusken was now emanating a glowing red color, which instantly reminded May of Ash's Torkoal using Overheat, when suddenly a large amount of steam started to form around Combusken's body, making May realize that Combusken had just learned a new move, Overheat. Much to everyone's surprise, especially May, Drew, and Lillian's, and Ash was also able to identify Combusken was starting to use Overheat, and told Max and Brock about it. Drew knew that Overheat could be disastrous, so he didn't hesitate with trying to attack first, having Absol use a Razor Wind towards Combusken. However, as the Razor Wind approached, Combusken used Overheat, generating an insane amount of firepower that destroyed Absol's Razor Wind and hit Absol hard. Much to Drew's surprise, although thankfully for him, Absol wasn't defeated yet. He had just lost some points. May was frustrated that Overheat didn't take it out, although Drew was obviously happy, and Harley was happy too, because he wanted Drew to win. Ash advised May to use a powerful Overheat again, as did Max, but Brock reminded the two of them that Overheat got weaker the more it was used, so using an Overheat immediately after the first one probably wouldn't be a good idea. On the battlefield, May and Drew taunt each other, each of them saying, "Oh, what attack are you going to use next? What are you going to do?" And eventually, they stare at each other for so long that they feel like they can read each other's psyches, and May quickly goes for another Overheat, even though Brock didn't think it was a good idea. Not only was the Overheat weaker, but to make matters worse, Absol launched a Water Pulse to protect itself from the attack and dissipate the attack, causing steam to fill the air, as a result of the mix of water and fire, which lowers May's points as a result. Drew then takes advantage of the steam, since Combusken probably couldn't see much, and told Absol to blind Combusken even more by using a Flash, which caught May off guard. However, Combusken flips forward and blocks the Flash with its feet. With Combusken now being extremely close range to Absol, literally touching Absol's head, Combusken uses this to his advantage by launching a close-range Overheat attack, which engulfs Absol in beautiful flames, even though the attack was weaker, which Ash, Brock, Max, Apom, and Pikachu were concerned about, because Combusken seemed to be getting pretty tired from the repeated usage of Overheat, and, the attack was getting weaker. Since the attack was weaker, Absol actually managed to shake off the flames, and this resulted in some sparkles emitting off of Absol, which made May lose several more of her points than she would have otherwise, which Drew taunted May about, making May angry. Drew also commented that May was foolish to continuously use Overheat, noticing what Ash and Brock had noticed, being that Combusken was tired, and took advantage of this by having Absol lunge forward with a Razor Wind, hitting Combusken very hard. Combusken tried to dodge, but it just couldn't, and was sent flying back. Ash, Brock, and Max were starting to panic, because they looked at the screen and saw that there was only 57 seconds left, and May was almost out of points. Drew was too, but he had more. And to make matters worse, Absol lunged forward again, preparing a Water Pulse attack, leading Combusken to somehow use another Overheat to try and counter the Water Pulse. But since the Water Pulse was a water attack against a fire attack, and also the Overheat was a lot weaker due to being used multiple times in succession, the Water Pulse was too strong for the Overheat and engulfed Combusken, leaving May with essentially no points. There was like maybe 1% of her points left, which Lillian commented on, along with the fact that there was only 32 seconds left. Drew thought the battle was over, and that there was no way Combusken would be able to get back up after taking a Water Pulse, but much to everyone's surprise, even Ash, Brock, and Max's, Combusken was still able to stand up. This didn't faze Drew though, as he simply told Absol to finish Combusken off with an Iron Tail, but as Absol jumped into the air to launch this attack, May smiled and ordered Combusken to use a Sky Uppercut, much to Drew's shock, as Combusken drags its claws along the ground to generate sparks, and then soars into the air and scores a direct hit on Absol, just as the timer hits 0. And Combusken landed on the ground, still standing, and hoping it did good. And actually, it did, because somehow, this last Sky Uppercut from Combusken was enough to give May the lead, and that meant that she was officially declared the winner by Lillian. She had actually beat Drew, officially being granted a spot in the Grand Festival semifinals, much to Drew's shock, and her shock as well, while Ash, Apom, Pikachu, Max, and Brock were just overjoyed at the win, while Apom and Pikachu were even high-fiving each other. Even Drew, while shocked, was able to give a nod of approval to May, as his way of congratulating her on the win. Brock then realized that May was intentionally using Overheat over and over again to make Drew essentially overconfident that he could win, which would make him come closer so that she could use this closeness to her advantage to use Sky Uppercut to finish the battle. So that's another reason why she was fine with Water Pulse, was because it made the Overheat weaker, which just made Drew even more overconfident. As Brock envisioned everything that went down in his head, Ash and Max were surprised by the sheer strategy that May had implemented. Soledad, from the waiting room, was immensely impressed with May's skills, while Harley, on the other hand, was immensely annoyed that May had won. The rest of the stadium was showering May with applause, and the rest of the coordinators in the waiting room, too. May then went up to Combusken and congratulated it on the win, as Combusken danced around happily. Drew then went over to his Absol and consoled it, admitting that it did a great job, which made May happy that Drew wasn't going too rough on Absol, and May was also happy to see that Drew took the loss well. He wasn't crying or nothing like that. He smiled at May, and that was another way of him congratulating her, and admitting that she actually was a good coordinator. May then hugged her Combusken, congratulating it once again, as every single one of the judges, being Raul Contesta, Mr. Sukizo, all Nurse Joyce, and Vivian, all said their 2 cents, congratulating May on her victory as well, but also not forgetting to compliment Drew and his skills. Lillian also threw in her congratulations too. As for Apom, he was extremely overjoyed after seeing the epic combination moves that May had used, and he was also overjoyed to just see May's skills, period. And he was so happy that he couldn't help but jump with joy and steal Ash's hat once more, rushing out of the stadium, leaving Ash and Pikachu to give chase outside of the stadium, leaving Brock and Max by themselves in the stands. Ash called out for Apom outside, and he chased after her for a while, but the chase ended when Apom stopped in its tracks and actually threw Ash's hat back to him, right as Brock and Max joined Ash outside as well. Ash, Brock, and Max then noticed that Apom was just standing there, bouncing on the spot, and preparing its fists. Ash, Brock, and Max wondered why the fuck Ash got his hat back so quick, but they eventually came to the conclusion that Apom simply just wanted to battle, and it took Ash's hat so that it could essentially force Ash outside. Now that they were outside, Ash accepted Apom's battle request, determined to actually try and capture Apom this time, having Pikachu attack Apom with a quick attack, although Apom dodged the attack and used Swift to hit Pikachu, although Pikachu quickly recovered and hit Apom with an Iron Tail. Apom quickly recovered from this, though, and used a Focus Punch, which knocked Pikachu to the ground, leaving Brock to panic as Apom continued to jump up and down in pure excitement at its own strength, proud of itself for doing well against Pikachu. Ash loved Apom's battling spirit, but he wanted to prove to Apom that he was stronger than it, and told Pikachu to unleash a Thunderbolt, which paralyzed Apom, allowing Ash to throw a Pokeball at it. Several passerbys had gathered in the area by this point and watched, along with Ash, Brock, and Max, as the Pokeball shook, and it shook for a long-ass time, and much to Ash and Pikachu's joy, Apom was caught. So, Ash jumps up and does a victory pose with Pikachu, as everyone around him applauds his catching skills, including a coordinator with a Hitmonchan, a coordinator with a Hitmonlee, a coordinator with a Magikarp, a coordinator with a Zangoose, and a coordinator with a Girafarig, and a coordinator with a Mightyena. Also, the fucking Magikarp salesman was there in the crowd for some reason, and congratulate him when suddenly Scott arrives, shocking Ash. He didn't expect Scott to appear. He usually only appeared when shit going on was related to the Battle Frontier. Max was the first one to notice Scott and pointed him out to Ash, which kind of disappointed Ash, because even though he was kind of happy to see Scott, he was also enjoying waving to the crowd and enjoying the praise he was getting from them. Meanwhile, we then cut to backstage in the coordinator-exclusive waiting room, where even coordinators who lost could wait. Even though May was still in this festival, she was in the waiting room, feeding Squirtle and Combuskin, congratulating them on their victory against Drew. Drew then walked up to May and congratulated her formally as well, admitting that she had some amazing combo moves. While May and Drew were talking, though, they directed their attention to the TV in the room that was showing Soledad battling her opponent in her top 8 battle, utilizing her Lapras and her Butterfree, and she was able to win very easily, leading May to come to the conclusion that she would likely have to face Soledad in the semifinals or the finals. Drew warned May that Soledad would be a tough opponent to beat, and she could not be beaten with force alone. A strategy would be required. Sure enough, Lillian then revealed the semi-final matchups once the top 8 had been completed, and May would be facing off against Soledad. So, the two of them went out to the battlefield when they were called out there by Lillian, with their match being the first of the semi-final matches, and both May and Soledad sent out their Pokemon. Soledad sending out her Pidgeot and Slowbro, while May chose her Munchlax and Combuskin. We don't see the start of the match. We see the first 3 minutes pass off screen as the fight starts with 2 minutes left, and Soledad still had over 2/3 of her score, while May's points had been depleted to only 1/4. May was determined to win, though, so with only 1 minute and 57 seconds left, she had her Munchlax use a Focus Punch, aiming for Slowbro, although Slowbro used a Psychic to counter the Focus Punch, because the Psychic caused Munchlax to get knocked backward, rotating around. Combuskin then goes in for a Fire Spin on Pidgeot, which does momentarily trap it, but Soledad then calls for a Feather Dance, which destroys the flames, and the feathers start raining down on both Combuskin and Munchlax, with these feathers now burning due to the Feather Dance being combined with the Fire Spin. Next, Slowbro used Yawn to put Combuskin to sleep, which basically put Combuskin under a little sleep spell, and there you go. May's points were immensely down by this point, while Combuskin just stood there sleeping and eventually fell on its ass, shocking Lillian by how badly May was losing right now. Ash and Max noticed how badly May was losing as well, and things just kept getting worse and worse for her. May, Max, Brock, as well as Scott were currently watching the battle from the stands. Brock was confused as to how Soledad was basically manipulating the pace of the battle by putting Combuskin to sleep and shit like that, something that Soledad would never usually do. As the battle continued, with May having Munchlax use a Solar Beam, but Slowbro simply used a Psychic to move itself and dodge the Solar Beam in time, while Pidgeot launched a Double Team that struck Combuskin. Essentially, all of the Double Team clones struck Combuskin. Scott explained why Soledad was doing so good to Brock and the others, saying that Soledad had succeeded in getting May to attack with powerful attacks over and over again, and easily dodging them, leading May to essentially lose points, without Soledad actually doing a whole bunch of direct attacks. Scott also noted that May's strategy right now was quite similar to the game plan. Ash seems to always use heavy offense with dazzling attacks, and referencing all of the Frontier Brain battles Ash had. Scott continued to elaborate, saying that usually Soledad would use a strategy like May's, where she would just attack with heavy attacks, but Scott explained that Soledad recognized that continuing to do that would basically make her and May more even, since they did the same thing. May was able to use the same strategy that she had used against Drew and Harley, the constant attack strategy, and she did the same thing. Then May could likely have the advantage, since she was very practiced with her strategy after her battles with Harley and Drew. Ash was confused as how May could have adapted battle styles from him, like Scott had suggested, but Scott clarified that since May had watched Ash battle ever since May first started out on her journey, she unconsciously adapted Ash's approach to battling, and right now it was proving very ineffective against what Soledad was currently doing. Sure enough, Soledad confidently ordered her Slowbro to use a Hyper Beam and ordered her Pidgeot to speed forward with an Aerial Ace, and both of these attacks were able to knock out Munchlax's Combuskin, sending him flying back. So, Lillian officially declared that May was eliminated and Soledad was advancing to the finals of the Grand Festival, which caused the entire crowd to erupt in applause. As the screen officially showed that Soledad was the winner, May looked disappointed with her loss, but regardless, she went up to her Combuskin and Munchlax, who became conscious again, and thanked them for putting up a great effort, and she then respectfully bowed to Soledad, congratulating her on her victory, though it was clear she was upset by the loss as she went backstage, holding her head down in shame as she quickly recalled Munchlax and Combuskin, but not before thanking them again for at least getting her to the semifinals. Back in the waiting room, Ash, Brock, and Max decided to meet up with May, after seeing her looking sad, while Drew continued to watch Soledad, now getting ready for her finals match. No, as Drew watched her from the waiting room on the television. Anyways, as for Ash and the gang, Ash, Brock, and Max comforted May, complimenting her on making it as far as she did, saying that she showed how brave and powerful she was to make it into the semifinals. And Max commented that May was a sister that any brother would hope for. May started to cry tears of joy as her friends continued to comfort her, saying that even though she lost, she made a huge step on her journey, making it to the top 4. May was still sad, but she was starting to get over it after all these compliments at least. Once May was relatively better, Ash and the gang decided to go out to the stands in person to watch Soledad battle, and sure enough, they watched her kick absolute ass, winning the finals, and therefore being awarded the Ribbon Cup for beating the Kanto Grand Festival, being presented it by Lillian, Vivian, Contesta, Tsukizo, and all the different Nurse Joy, and all of the previous coordinators who lost came down to where Soledad was standing in the stadium and clapped and applauded her, congratulating her as well, including May, Drew, and Harley, while the entire crowd also applauded, including Ash, Brock, and Max, and Lillian activated some confetti cannons to really celebrate Soledad's victory. Later that night, a after-party was held for all the participating contestants, with all their friends being allowed to participate too. Everyone was having fun inside a party building at the Indigo Plateau, but after the party, Drew decided to take his leave, although May hurriedly chased after him, holding a single rose, and eventually caught up to him, asking him if they would ever see each other again, even though the Grand Festival was over, and Drew confirmed that they likely would see each other again. He didn't see why not, especially if they both continued their contest goals. May and Drew then said goodbye to each other in a relatively nice manner as Drew walked off, with May waving to him until Drew was entirely gone. Then suddenly, Scott, Ash, Max, and Brock showed up behind her, and Scott congratulated May on making it as far as she did, because he never did that before. May then admitted to Ash, Brock, Max, and Scott that despite her loss, she was feeling as confident as ever, and was now ready to head towards the Battle Pyramid, excited to see Ash win against Brandon. Scott then informed Ash that now the Battle Pyramid had landed near the ruins of a place called Fennel Valley, and Max looked at his Pokénav and found out that Fennel Valley wasn't too far from the Indigo Plateau. With that, Ash and the gang decide to go to their last destination in Ash's Battle Frontier adventure, Fennel Valley, to get to the Battle Pyramid, so Ash could have a rematch against Brandon, even though he hasn't really trained whatsoever. All he did this episode was get a goddamn napalm, but whatever. They also said goodbye to Scott for the time being.